I've always had a strange love for the woods. Not in a rugged survivalist sense, because I was never one of those people who could disappear into the forest with nothing but a knife and a canteen. For me, it was always about peace. I liked the quiet trails, the crunch of dry leaves under my boots, the way the air always felt cleaner and cooler in the shade of tall pines. I liked being somewhere I could leave behind the constant buzz of cars, voices, and screens. That's why last summer I decided to take on a personal challenge, a 3-day solo hike in a state forest I had never visited before. I wanted to test myself, to see if I could handle the isolation, the quiet, and maybe even the unease that comes from being completely alone out there. I arrived on a Friday morning, parked my car in the small gravel lot, slung my backpack over my shoulders, and stepped into the green wall of trees, not realizing how much I would regret it later. The first day was exactly what I wanted it to be. The trails wound lazily through tall oaks and maples, the sunlight filtering through in golden patches that shifted whenever the wind stirred the canopy. I passed a few other hikers during the first couple of hours, but once I took a side trail that branched off deeper into the forest, I didn't see another soul. By mid-afternoon, I had found a spot near a small creek to set up camp. The water trickled softly nearby, and the ground was flat enough for my tent. I boiled water, made some instant noodles, and wrote in my journal while the sun dropped lower, painting the forest in shades of orange and red. That night, I crawled into my sleeping bag feeling like I had made the right decision. The frogs and crickets sang outside the tent, and for a while I just listened, calm and content, until I drifted off to sleep. It was the next night when everything changed. I had hiked farther down the narrowing trail, deeper into the woods, so deep that the ground was uneven and the trail markers grew scarce. I didn't mind at first because I had food and water and I still thought of myself as in control. When I set up camp that second evening, though, the stillness around me felt different. The forest was quieter, and the silence had an edge to it, like the trees were holding their breath. I had just started cooking dinner on my little stove when I heard it, a scream.
At first, I thought I had imagined it because it was faint and distant, carried across the woods in such a way that I couldn't be sure if it was real. But then, a few minutes later, I heard it again. Longer this time, unmistakably human, and filled with such raw fear that every hair on the back of my neck stood on end.
I froze, spatula in hand, listening. The sound didn't come again right away, but the damage was done. My calm had shattered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, somewhere beyond the tree line, screaming for their life. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe there were kids in the woods playing some kind of sick prank. Maybe a hiker had gotten lost and was calling out. Maybe, and this was the thought I wanted most to believe, maybe it was just some kind of animal cry that sounded human in the right conditions. But no matter how I spun it, the unease stuck with me, clinging like a cold hand around my throat. I barely slept that night, jerking awake at the smallest noises, imagining shapes moving outside my tent, every creak of a branch or rustle of leaves magnified in my mind. The next morning I almost packed up immediately to head back. My plan had been to spend 3 days out there, but I was already thinking of cutting it short. When I crawled out of my tent, though, I noticed something that pushed my fear into overdrive. There were footprints in the dirt around my campsite. Not animal tracks, but human ones, larger than mine, heavier, circling the tent in a wide loop as if someone had walked around me while I slept. My chest tightened as I realized what that meant. Someone had been watching me. They hadn't announced themselves, hadn't called out, just walked in circles around where I lay vulnerable in my sleeping bag. My brain screamed at me to get the hell out of there, and I listened. I shoved my gear into my backpack with shaking hands and left camp without even eating breakfast. My plan was simple: get back on the main trail and head for the parking lot as fast as I could. But as I retraced my steps, the woods seemed to shift around me. The trail that I was sure I had followed in was suddenly unmarked, overgrown, and unfamiliar. After an hour of walking, I realized with a sinking stomach that I was lost. I pulled out my map, tried to orient myself, but nothing made sense. Every landmark I thought I recognized seemed different up close, and the longer I stood there, the more the panic started to take hold. That was when the screams started again. Only this time they weren't distant. They were closer, so close I could hear the sharp inhale between wails, so close it was no longer just one voice but several, overlapping in a horrible chorus of agony. Sometimes they sounded far away, then, in an instant, like they were just past the nearest tree line, chasing me from all directions. I ran, stumbling through underbrush, scraping my arms on branches, tearing my jeans on thorns, but I couldn't escape the sounds. They followed me, growing louder, clearer, as if whoever was screaming was moving with me, matching my pace. By late afternoon, my legs were trembling from exhaustion, and my lungs burned with every breath. I hadn't seen another hiker all day, hadn't found a single trail marker, and the realization hit me that I might not make it out before nightfall. I collapsed onto a fallen log, gulping water, trying to steady my shaking hands. That's when I saw movement in the trees. At first, I thought it was just my tired brain playing tricks, but no. Something, or someone, was standing among the trunks, half hidden in shadow. It was tall, thin, and completely still. I couldn't make out a face, but I felt the unmistakable weight of its gaze on me. When I blinked, it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even bother setting up the tent again. I sat with my back against a tree, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, listening to the screams come and go in the darkness. Sometimes they were distant, sometimes so close I thought I'd feel a hand on my shoulder at any second. Every time I flicked my light toward the trees, I swore I caught glimpses of shapes ducking out of sight. By the time dawn broke, I was a wreck, delirious with fear and exhaustion. But in that gray early light, I finally saw something that gave me a sliver of hope, a trail marker. Bright red paint on a tree trunk. I don't think I've ever cried harder in my life. I followed the markers, one after another, until finally, hours later, I stumbled back into the parking lot. My car was still there. The gravel lot was empty, silent, as though nothing had ever been wrong. When I slammed the door shut behind me and turned the ignition, I didn't stop shaking until I was halfway back to town. Even now, months later, I can still hear those screams when I close my eyes at night, layered voices echoing through the trees. And I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found the trail marker. If I had stayed just one more night out there, in those woods that seemed to come alive with pain and terror. Sometimes when I think about those footprints circling my tent, I realize something even worse. Maybe those screams weren't cries for help. Maybe they were lures. I've always been a cautious camper, the kind of guy who double-checks his gear, keeps a first aid kit handy, and never leaves food unsealed. My friends used to joke that camping with me was more like camping with a nervous scout leader, but that caution always kept us safe. When I finally decided to try a solo camping trip, I thought I'd be fine. I had all the essentials, a mapped-out plan, and I wasn't going deep into wilderness. Just a national forest with a few marked trails and some primitive campgrounds. I figured the worst thing that could happen was running into a bear. But with my careful food storage and bear spray, even that felt unlikely. I was wrong. The real danger wasn't wildlife. It was people, or something that looked like one. The first night was uneventful. The kind of serene peace I had hoped for. I pitched my tent at a designated site, lit a fire, and cooked a simple dinner. The air was cool but not cold, and the sky was so clear that the stars felt close enough to touch. I sat by the fire for hours, just listening to the sounds of the woods, the crackle of flames, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional rustle in the underbrush that I told myself was just small animals. When I finally crawled into my tent, I felt relaxed, even proud of myself for finally trying solo camping. The night passed quietly, and by morning, I was excited for the next stretch of my trip. The second night, I set up camp in a more isolated spot. It wasn't an official campsite, but the ground was flat and soft, and I was still within a few miles of the main trail. I got my fire going again and settled in, sitting cross-legged in the glow of the flames while I ate and wrote in my journal. That's when I noticed movement, just beyond the reach of the firelight. At first, I thought it was another camper, someone who had wandered close. I even called out a simple hello into the dark. But no voice answered. Instead, there was just silence, heavier than before, as if the forest itself was listening. My eyes strained against the shadows until finally I saw it. A man standing just at the edge of the trees. He was tall, thin, and motionless. I couldn't make out his face in the dark, but his outline was unmistakable against the shifting firelight. My first thought was that he must be another hiker who needed help. Maybe someone who had lost his way. I called out again, louder this time, asking if he was okay. Still, no answer. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't step forward. He just stood there, half concealed in the shadows, watching me. I can't explain why I didn't run right then. Maybe it was because a part of me wanted to believe there was a rational explanation, that he was just another camper who felt shy or strange about approaching. So instead, I did what felt natural. I raised my flashlight and pointed the beam toward him. The second the light hit where he stood, the space was empty. No man, no sound of footsteps retreating, nothing. My chest tightened as I realized what that meant. Whoever he was, he'd moved without making a sound, vanishing into the trees in the blink of an eye. That night, I barely slept. Every few minutes, I flicked on my flashlight, scanning the trees, expecting to see him again. At some point, exhaustion must have won because I woke up at dawn to the sound of birds and the sight of my fire reduced to ash. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, a tired mind seeing patterns in the shadows. I almost believed that until I stepped out of my tent and saw the footprints. They were large, boot-shaped, pressed deep into the dirt, circling the campsite. Whoever I had seen last night hadn't just stood at the edge of the firelight. At some point, while I sat by the flames, he had walked the perimeter of my camp, tracing me like a predator stalking prey. I should have packed up and left right then. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to abandon the trip and return to my car. But stubbornness held me in place. I told myself it was just some weirdo, maybe a curious hiker who had no bad intentions. I tried to brush it off, but the unease clung to me all day as I hiked deeper into the woods. When I set up camp for the third night, I found myself glancing constantly over my shoulder, my ears straining for every sound. I built my fire larger than usual, hoping the bright flames would keep me safe, or at least keep whatever I had seen at a distance. But he came back. I was poking at the fire with a stick when I saw him again, standing in the exact same spot at the edge of the firelight. This time, I didn't say a word. I just stared, my chest pounding, my grip tight on the stick. The fire crackled, shadows danced, and the man just stood there, watching me. My flashlight was in my pocket, but I was afraid to shine it at him again, afraid that if I did, I'd see him closer than before. Minutes passed, maybe even an hour, with me frozen in place, refusing to look away, and him silent and still. Finally, I worked up the courage to whisper, "What do you want?" No answer. I threw the stick into the fire, grabbed my flashlight, and flicked it on. Once again, the space where he had been standing was empty. But this time, I didn't just see empty trees. I saw movement, several shapes ducking back into the forest, too fast for me to track. My stomach dropped as I realized the truth. There wasn't just one man. There were more of them. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat by the fire with my knife in my lap, waiting for dawn. The shadows seemed to shift with every gust of wind. And every so often, I swore I heard soft footsteps circling just out of view. By morning I was shaking, my nerves shot. But I forced myself to pack up and start the long hike back toward the trailhead. I didn't care about the rest of my trip. I just wanted out. The hike back was a blur. I walked fast, barely stopping to drink water, jumping at every sound. Several times, I caught glimpses of movement in the trees, shapes that looked human but melted away whenever I tried to focus. At one point, I found a fresh set of boot prints on the trail ahead of me, leading in the same direction I was walking. They weren't mine. Someone was leading me or waiting for me to follow. My mouth went dry, but I kept walking, too afraid to stop. By late afternoon, I finally reached the parking lot. My car was still there, sitting alone in the gravel, the only sign of civilization after days of fear. I threw my backpack inside, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that those silent figures were standing just behind the tree line, waiting for me to return. When I was younger, I used to think the woods were safe as long as you respected them. Bring the right supplies, mark your trail, keep a level head, and nothing bad could happen. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had been on dozens of camping trips with friends and a handful alone. Nothing had ever gone wrong. So when I set out for a long weekend hike through a remote section of national forest, I didn't think twice about it. I had food, water, my map, and my compass. The weather was clear, and the only thing I worried about was whether I'd get bored without cell service. By the end of that trip, I wasn't bored. I was terrified. The first day passed easily enough. I hiked about 10 miles along a rugged trail before stopping near a river to set up camp. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and insects, and I remember thinking how peaceful it felt to be away from the noise of the city. I ate dinner by the water, crawled into my sleeping bag, and drifted off listening to the steady rush of the current. The next morning I packed up early and set off again, planning to follow the river deeper into the forest, before looping back toward the trailhead on the third day. I walked for hours, the sun filtering through the branches overhead, and by late afternoon I started looking for a good spot to set up camp. That's when I saw it. At first I thought I was seeing things. Through the trees, a shape stood out against the natural green and brown of the forest. A straight line, dark and solid, not at all like the curves and textures of the woods. I pushed through the undergrowth, and there it was, a cabin. Old, weathered, the wood gone gray with age. It looked abandoned, but somehow it still stood tall, tucked away in a place I never would have expected. I walked around it slowly, taking in the sight. The windows were grimy and dark. The roof sagged but hadn't collapsed. The front porch creaked under my weight when I stepped onto it. The strangest thing was the door. It was shut tight and locked with a heavy padlock. My first instinct was excitement. An abandoned cabin in the woods? It felt like stumbling onto treasure. I imagined taking photos, telling friends about it, maybe even staying inside if it was safe enough. But when I peered through the dusty windows, I couldn't see much, just shadows. Shapes of furniture maybe, though the glass was too dirty to be sure. I tugged lightly on the door, but the padlock held firm. Whoever had lived there once clearly hadn't wanted anyone else getting inside. I should have left it at that. I should have moved on and set up my tent by the river. But something about the place pulled at me, a mix of curiosity and unease that I couldn't shake. I ended up making camp within sight of the cabin, telling myself it was no different than camping anywhere else. But as night fell, I found myself staring at it over and over, my fire flickering in the dark while the locked door seemed to watch me back. It was sometime after midnight when I woke to a sound. At first I thought it was the wind pushing branches against each other. But then I heard it again, louder this time. A steady rhythmic creak like a door opening slowly on old hinges. My heart hammered as I sat up in my tent, straining to listen. The sound came again, and this time I knew exactly what it was. It was the cabin door. I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out. The moonlight cast pale silver across the clearing, and there it was, the cabin, dark and silent. The door looked shut, the padlock still in place. But I swear on everything I saw it move. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of it hanging slightly ajar before swinging shut again with a heavy creak that echoed through the trees. I sat frozen, my flashlight gripped in my shaking hand, waiting for something, anything, to step out from that dark doorway. Nothing did. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the silence returned, and I forced myself to lie back down. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning I tried to convince myself it had been a dream. Maybe I had been half asleep and imagined the sound. Maybe the padlock had shifted in the wind. But when I stepped closer to the cabin, my stomach dropped. The padlock was gone. It wasn't lying in the dirt, wasn't hanging broken on the hasp. It was just gone as if it had never been there. The door itself was shut tight, but I didn't dare test it again. My skin crawled just standing near the place. I hiked all day, trying to put distance between me and the cabin. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I'd stop to catch my breath, and the forest would go silent, too silent, like the trees themselves were holding their breath along with me. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps in the underbrush behind me, slow, deliberate, matching my pace. Every time I spun around, the woods were empty, but the unease never left. By the time the sun dipped low, I had no choice but to set up camp again. I built my fire high, hoping the light would push back the fear clawing at my chest. As the flames flickered, I told myself the cabin was miles away now, that I was safe. I even started to feel a little calmer, until I noticed something leaning against a tree near my camp. It was metal, catching the firelight in its reflection. I stood, heart pounding, and walked toward it. My knees almost buckled when I saw what it was. The padlock. The same heavy lock that had been on the cabin door, now sitting casually against a tree less than 20 feet from where I slept. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat with my back to the fire, knife in hand, eyes darting at every shadow. I swear I saw movement between the trees, flashes of pale shapes slipping out of sight whenever I turned my head. At one point, the fire crackled and sparked, and in that moment of sudden light, I saw something clearly. A figure, tall and thin, standing just beyond the circle of firelight. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stood there, half concealed by the trees, watching. By the time I blinked, it was gone. I left before dawn the next morning. I didn't even bother breaking down my tent. I just stuffed what I could into my backpack and started walking. I followed my compass, moving as quickly as I could, desperate to find the trail again. Hours passed, the sun rising higher, but the forest only grew denser, unfamiliar. I felt like I was moving in circles, like no matter how far I went, the trees closed in tighter around me. When I finally stumbled onto a dirt road, I nearly cried with relief. It wasn't the trail I'd started on, but it was something. I followed it until, mercifully, I reached the main park entrance, where a ranger station sat just beyond the gate. I didn't tell the ranger the full story. I just said I had gotten lost and needed directions back to the parking lot. He gave me a strange look, like he could see the fear written all over my face, but he didn't ask questions. I never went back for the tent I abandoned that morning. I don't think I could even if I wanted to, because sometimes I wonder if the cabin is even real. It wasn't on any of the maps, and when I searched online later, I couldn't find any record of an old structure in that part of the forest. Still, I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. The creak of the door, the missing padlock, the figure in the trees, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear that sound again, that slow, heavy creak of old hinges opening in the dark. I always loved hiking more than anything else. To me, the woods were a place of peace, a place to disconnect from the noise of the world and listen to something deeper. I had been hiking trails since I was a teenager, but this time was different. This was the first time I had decided to go alone for more than a couple of days. My plan was simple: drive up to the state forest, spend 3 nights hiking off the beaten path, and test myself in complete solitude. It was meant to be empowering. Instead, it was the most terrifying experience of my life. The trail started as it always did: familiar dirt paths, birds chirping, and the faint sound of wind threading through the trees. But by the second afternoon, I decided to veer away from the marked trail and follow what looked like an old path cutting deeper into the woods. The wooden marker was broken and unreadable, almost swallowed by moss. That should have been my first warning sign, but curiosity pulled me forward. I told myself I'd walk an hour in, then turn back. I never turned back. The first night camping on the forgotten trail was fine. The forest grew thicker, the trees taller, almost suffocating, but I felt excited rather than afraid. I built a small fire, cooked some instant noodles, and let the quiet settle over me. It was when I tried to sleep that I noticed something strange. The woods were too quiet. I've slept in forests before, and there are always sounds: crickets, owls, the occasional rustle of a small animal. Here there was nothing. Just the crackle of my fire and the sound of my own breathing. It was unsettling, but I forced myself to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up. At first I thought it was from a bad dream, but then I heard it. A sound out of place. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sound of whistling. Not a bird, not the wind, but someone whistling a simple tune, steady and slow, somewhere in the darkness beyond my tent. I froze in place, every nerve in my body on fire. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but then it stopped abruptly, like whoever was making it realized I was listening. I didn't move for the rest of the night. When morning came, I convinced myself it had to have been something natural. Maybe the wind through hollow branches, maybe just my half-asleep brain inventing sounds. I packed up camp quickly, but instead of leaving, I decided to keep going. I don't know why. Maybe pride, maybe stupidity. The trail kept twisting deeper into the forest, until the canopy blocked most of the sun. It was darker, colder. I noticed things that unnerved me: tree trunks marked with deep scratches, strange piles of stones stacked deliberately at intervals along the path. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched grew heavier with every step. By the second night, I was truly scared. I set up camp in a small clearing, barely large enough for my tent. I didn't build a fire this time, worried it would attract attention. I sat in the dark with my flashlight off, clutching my knife like it would actually protect me. That's when I heard it again. The whistling. Closer this time. A slow, tuneless hum that echoed through the trees. My heart pounded as I realized it wasn't just some random sound. It was deliberate. Someone was out there, someone following me. I held my breath, listening as the sound circled my camp, weaving between the trees. It grew louder, then softer, like whoever was making it was walking slowly around me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I forced myself to stay inside the tent, hoping they wouldn't come closer. The whistling stopped after what felt like hours, but I couldn't sleep. I just sat there, shaking, waiting for morning. When daylight finally came, I packed and moved fast. I wanted out. But when I checked my GPS, the map wasn't loading. My phone had no signal, no reception, no way to track my location. I thought I remembered the way I came, so I followed it, but the trail seemed to have shifted. The stone piles were still there, but they were different, larger, arranged in odd shapes, almost like symbols. I started walking faster, my panic rising. By late afternoon, I realized I was completely lost. Every direction looked the same. The forest was endless, suffocating. I stopped to rest near a large oak, trying to calm down, when I saw something that froze me to my core. Carved into the bark in rough, jagged letters was a single word. Stay. I stumbled backward, my stomach turning. I hadn't carved it. I hadn't seen it before. Someone had been here. Someone wanted me to stay. My hands shook as I backed away, nearly tripping over another stone pile at the base of the tree. This one wasn't just random rocks. It was shaped like a crude figure, a body, with arms and legs, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. I ran. I didn't care which direction, I just ran. My backpack bounced against me, branches whipped my face, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I tripped and fell hard, scraping my knees and hands. I lay there, gasping for air, when I heard it again. The whistling. Slow, steady, deliberate. This time there was no mistaking it. It was right behind me. I scrambled to my feet, spinning around with my knife in hand, shining my flashlight into the trees. Nothing. Just the endless forest, silent and unmoving. But the sound was there, slipping between the trees, growing louder, closer. I screamed into the dark, demanding whoever it was show themselves. The whistling stopped. For a moment there was nothing. Then, in the faint distance, I heard a voice. Low, almost a whisper, but clear enough. Stay, that broke me. I ran again, blindly this time, until I could no longer breathe. When I finally stopped, I collapsed near a fallen log, drenched in sweat, my heart beating out of my chest. I sat there until the sun began to set, and for the first time, I considered that I might never find my way out. That night, I didn't bother setting up camp. I just curled against the log, clutching my knife, waiting. The forest seemed to press in on me darker than it had ever been. Hours passed in silence, and then sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps. Not animals. Heavy, deliberate human footsteps moving slowly toward me. My flashlight was dead, so I sat there in complete darkness, listening as they drew closer. My breath caught in my throat when I realized they had stopped just a few feet away from me. For the longest time, there was nothing but silence. Then, in the darkness, the whistling started again. So close I swore I could feel it against my skin. I wanted to scream, to lash out with the knife, but I couldn't move. I sat frozen, paralyzed with terror. The whistling continued, circling me, until suddenly it stopped. And then, whoever it was walked away. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, the sun was barely rising. I stood slowly, every muscle aching, and that's when I noticed something carved into the log I had slept against. My name. My full name, etched deep into the wood, fresh and raw. I don't remember how I got out of the woods. My memory after that is fractured. I just remember running, stumbling, until I eventually burst out onto a road where a ranger found me. They said I was dehydrated, exhausted, delirious. I tried to explain about the whistling, about the carvings, but they just nodded sympathetically and told me no one had used that trail in decades. I've never gone hiking alone again. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I swear I still hear it. That same slow, steady whistle, drifting through the air, like someone is waiting for me to come back. I've never been the type of person who scares easily. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, walked home late at night plenty of times, and thought I knew fear. But fear in the city doesn't compare to the kind of fear you feel in the woods when you're completely alone and there's nothing around for miles but trees, dirt, and the faint sound of animals moving in the darkness. The story I'm about to share with you took place in the Appalachian Mountains 2 years ago. I had decided to take a week off work, leave my phone behind, and disappear into the wilderness for a solo camping trip. My friends thought I was crazy, but for me, the woods were supposed to be a place of peace. Instead, they became a place I'll never forget, because out there, I realized just how vulnerable a human really is. The first 2 nights of my trip were exactly what I had hoped for. I set up camp near a stream, cooked over a fire, and lay back under a sky full of stars. I hiked during the day, sometimes for hours, following trails that barely existed anymore. There was no one around, not even the occasional hunter or hiker. The silence was heavy, but in a good way. It made me feel like I was the only person alive, the last human left in a massive, endless forest. But on the third night, something changed. That was the first time I had the feeling I wasn't alone anymore. It started subtle. I was sitting by the fire, poking at the wood, when I heard what I thought was a branch snapping somewhere in the trees. I froze and listened, but when nothing followed, I brushed it off as a deer or raccoon moving around. But the feeling didn't go away. I could swear I felt eyes on me, like I was being watched from just beyond the firelight. It was enough to make me put out the fire earlier than usual and crawl into my tent. I zipped it up tight and tried to sleep, but every few minutes I'd hear something, like soft footfalls circling the perimeter of my camp, or a slow dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across the ground. The next morning I woke up with my heart pounding, realizing I hadn't slept much at all. When I stepped out of the tent, I found something that made my stomach drop. About 20 feet away from my camp on a tree was a handprint. Not a muddy smudge or some animal marking, a clear full handprint in what looked like ash or soot. The fingers were long, too long, and it looked fresh. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had touched the tree after stoking the fire with a burned stick, but when I held my hand up to compare, the print was easily 3 inches longer than mine. I should have packed up and left then. I know that now. But at the time, I told myself it had to have some explanation, and I wasn't about to let paranoia ruin my trip. I forced myself to keep going, hiked further up the mountain, and set up camp again by another stream. I even convinced myself I felt safer there, further from where I had seen the handprint. But when the sun went down and I was left with nothing but my small fire again, the feeling of being watched returned stronger than before. That night, I heard it clearly. Footsteps. They weren't the uneven, quick steps of an animal. These were slow, deliberate, and heavy, circling around the camp. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the woods. But every time I thought I caught a glimpse of something, it vanished. The trees played tricks on my eyes. Shadows shifted, branches swayed, and I could never focus on anything long enough to know for sure what I was seeing. But one time I thought I saw a pale shape move between 2 trees, tall and thin, almost blending with the bark. I shouted out into the darkness, trying to sound confident. "Hello? Who's out there?" My voice cracked a little, betraying me. The woods went silent. No crickets, no rustling, nothing. And then, after about 30 seconds, I heard the slow crunch of footsteps moving away. It should have comforted me, but it didn't. It felt like whatever was out there was just toying with me, letting me know it was close enough to hear, but never close enough to confront. By the 4th day, I was exhausted, barely able to think straight. I started the hike back down, deciding I'd had enough. I was about halfway to my car when I noticed something disturbing. Along the path, every now and then, I saw those same long blackened handprints on trees, always facing me, like they had been left as a trail. They got more frequent the further I went, until finally I reached a clearing where I had to stop. In the middle of that clearing was something I still can't explain. A circle of stones had been arranged on the ground, maybe 10 feet wide. Inside the circle, laid out in careful rows, were dead animals, squirrels, birds, even a fox. All of them had their eyes missing. The sight made my stomach churn, but what made me stumble back was the fact that each animal had been placed with its head facing the center of the circle, as if they were worshipping something. And in the very center of the circle, scrawled into the dirt, was another massive handprint. But this one wasn't made with ash. It looked like it had been burned directly into the earth, black and charred, as if something impossibly hot had pressed into it. I didn't wait around. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my pack slamming against my back, branches scratching my arms. I didn't care. I just wanted out. But running in the woods alone is never a good idea. I slipped on loose dirt and fell hard, cutting my knee. I tried to get up, but that's when I heard it. The first and only time I ever heard its voice. It wasn't words, exactly, but a deep, guttural sound, like someone exhaling slowly right next to my ear. It made my blood run cold, and I swear I felt hot breath on my neck. I screamed and forced myself to get up, ignoring the pain in my leg. And I didn't stop running until I reached the parking area where my car was. When I finally got there, something made me freeze again. My car door was open. I had locked it before I left, I was sure of it. But there it was, wide open, and on the inside of the driver's side window was a single handprint. The same long blackened fingers stretched across the glass. I almost left my car behind, but I couldn't. I jumped inside, slammed the door, and peeled out of there as fast as the car would go. I didn't stop driving until I hit the nearest town. To this day, I don't know what followed me in those woods, and I've never gone camping alone again. But I still think about that sound I heard, that horrible exhale. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed late at night, I think I hear it again, faintly, like it followed me back. And every once in a while, when I wake up in the morning, I swear I see faint black smudges on my windows. They fade by the time I look again, but I know what I saw. I don't know what the Silent Watcher is, or why it chose me, but I do know one thing. If you ever feel eyes on you in the woods, don't ignore it, because you're not imagining it.